Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 56. We're starting this one off with an uncommon sight, the AC-1 Sentinel, driven here by IB the One True Nub. And the reason why it's an uncommon sight is because it's pretty dreadful. Now there are some fairly terrible mid-tier premiums around anyway, but this has to be one of the worst. I mean, you know, tanks like the Panzer 3K are also pretty bad, but even just as a tier 4 tank, this is just one of the worst. Possibly the worst thing about it is that even though it has a 40mm gun, it's the same diddly little 2-pounder gun that you find on a lot of the low tier British. It's got a pretty bad rate of fire. In fact, it's almost got the worst DPM at tier 4 overall. There's only a couple of tanks that are worse, and two of the things that are worse are basically the Valentine with either of the 75mm or the 6-pounder option it gets. And the Valentine is notorious for its terrible DPM, but at least it packs a little bit more damage than this thing. But no, it's not just the absolutely god-awful DPM, it's the fact that it has a 2.7 second base aim time. To put that in context, the tier 5 derp gun medium tanks have a better aim time than this 40mm gun. And to find worse handling than that, you've got to look at some of the 75mm that, in fact, not even the 75mm, those are all mostly 2.5 seconds at this tier. Like the AMX-40 is 2.5 seconds. This is 2.7 is bad. You know, 2.7 is, we're talking in the realm of 122mm derpy Soviet guns at this point. Not even derp guns, but you know, the big 122mm guns. So this is the thing, if nothing else, that makes this such a bad machine. It's not just the terrible DPM, it's the terrible DPM coupled with the absolutely god-awful, shockingly bad gun handling. But here we have IB the One True Nub playing it anyway, because, I don't know, he enjoys a challenge, I guess. Now the armour's not completely terrible on this, and I have to say, having trashed this, the one that you get at tier 6, the AC4, is actually pretty decent. Still doesn't have particularly good gun handling, but you've suddenly got a 17-pounder gun, so it feels like you pack a lot more of a punch for your tier, and you're not just weirdly gimped because reasons. But on the whole, yeah, don't buy this. The AC1 is dreadful, and it's never not been dreadful ever since it came out. So this is a top tier match, which is pretty lucky, but in typical tier 4 match fashion, everything's going pear-shaped very quickly. We're only about, what, 4 minutes into this, just about, and half of each team is dead. In fact, more than half of his team is dead. And this is not an especially fast machine, so he's basically going to have to turn back for the cap now if he's to have any chance of getting there. Now he does have some teammates left alive, but he's rapidly running out of them. The enemy team just made a big push down the 1-2-3 line, and because it's low tiers, nobody has particularly high amounts of health or armour, so although they sustained large numbers of casualties and they've lost a fair few tanks on this side as well, it looks like his own team is doing rather badly. So it's not impossible that this could be a win, but he'd have to work rather hard for it. So there's a T-29 there and the Valentine 2, which is also a dreadful tank, but at least it gets a top tier only matchmaking. You know, that's probably the one good thing about that machine. You basically have to fire almost all premium to be effective against most things that you see, but you'll never see tier 5s unlike this thing. Yeah, it's not looking like a great situation, but you know, with the Panzer 1C out the way, and it was able to at least turn fast enough to keep the strongest armour towards that guy, he's got a chance of maybe bringing this back to be a bit more even, but I think we can't count on his allies too much. The T-29's just died, and the Valentine 2 is now not really in a position to support him, and the only other thing that's left is a T-127 who's approaching the tracks down from the southern side. So it's 3 versus 3. He's lost a little bit more health. He can take, I think, what, 1 hit from the LTP maybe. The Keyhole might kill him, I'm not sure. I can't remember what that has as a gun offhand, but I don't know, there's a chance he could survive that hit as well, but maybe not. And then there's artillery, and even though it's only low tier artillery, that could still pose a threat. So the Valentine 2 died, and it's maybe not that surprising. It's a slow machine, couldn't really get to cover, and I'd be the one true nub himself. Well, he's come to link up with his ally and maybe push forward down this flank a bit, but yeah, somebody was sitting in bushes with some binoculars, and unfortunately he's not managed to get very far. Now, the better thing might have been to advance under the cover of terrain on the 2-3 line, but it seems very likely that he would have died either way, because if the Kehoe, which is a light tank, has just sat there with decent concealment and binoculars, even if they didn't knock him out, I presume they were also spotting for the LTP and the artillery. So now all that's left is this T-127, who, well, he's not going to carry this, I'll give it away right now. Yeah, he does still have full health, but these last couple of enemy tanks are at least working together in some fashion. Although for some reason the next thing that gets spotted is this M7 Priest. Not entirely sure why. Maybe they asked the priest to go in and try and spot for them rather than going in themselves. Although, you know, you would think based on that maybe these last two enemy tanks are both really low health, and maybe the Kehoe is, but the LTP, as it turns out, isn't. Or is it the other way around? No, it's the Kehoe that is full health. There we go. It's the LTP that doesn't get seen again. So the LTP just goes for it. And the T-127 doesn't have a particularly hard-hitting gun, and because they're both high health, well, they're both missing shots, but I'm pretty sure the Kehoe's gun hits a bit harder, and the LTP is shooting at him as well. So yeah, that's it for the T-127, and that's the game. But still, it was quite a close match, and considering the chaos that can be lower tier matches, I think I'd be the one true nub for an AC-1 did pretty well for himself there. It was an ace tanker and a top gun on a defeat, along with a high caliber and a Spartan as well. He must have bounced a shot while he was at very low health there. 1568, and bear in mind this 40mm gun does what, 50 average damage per shell, and the DPM is just barely over 1100, I think. So that is definitely not a bad result considering the nature of this machine. So just to reiterate, don't buy the AC-1. It's terrible. It really is. So we're going to jump up rather to the higher tiers for the next replay. And I don't think it's a machine I've actually featured too often before. This is the Object 430 version 2, driven by King Trigon. And yeah, it's one of the more awkward ones perhaps because it's got that rear mounted turret, but I think the armor's pretty decent. But honestly, my knowledge of the high tier Soviet medium tanks generally is quite limited. I've never advanced very far down that tech tree. In fact, the furthest I've gotten is the T-43, and it took me a really long time to get there. Because I actually kind of skipped over the T-34, or at least the Soviet T-34, because I've played the Chinese one, which is just a bit worse because reasons. Yeah, I kind of skipped over it and went onto the medium line via the KV-13, and then just never really got past the T-43, and this was getting towards the stages of the game where I was starting to play less anyway. And now these days, well, if I do go back and play World of Tanks, it's not to play the T-43, I'll tell you that much. Oh, it's not a terrible tank, it's just, you know, I'd much rather derp around in a KV-2 or something like that. So I think he was, you know, expecting more of his teammates to come this way, but we still have a huge clump of them quite near the base. The Ferdy being up on the tank destroyer ledge we can understand, but a Panther is not particularly helpful. He did in the end get the 110 and the Rheinmetall Bullsig coming to help him, and there's a T-44-100 heading this way as well. But of all the heavy tanks, well, the T-29 went to the Glacier, which is, I guess, not a terrible place for a T-29 to be from the northern spawn. You can basically be fully hull down. But yeah, it's really just the 110 that's come here. The Black Prince and the T-34 are in the middle. In fact, the T-34 is going right out into the middle under the gun of a Tortoise and multiple other tanks. Although he might be getting some cover from things like the 1375, but no, the T-34 just threw their tank away, so never mind. They were not much use to anybody. So he's just trading fire at the moment. There isn't any artillery in play, so that makes fighting this corner much more viable. If there's artillery from the southern spawn, they can hit this corner, and it basically becomes an exercise in pushing forward quickly enough that that you don't just sit here getting taken apart by said artillery, because if it turns into a protracted engagement, in the long run it's not tenable to hold it. It has to be a corner that you take and hold relatively quickly, because otherwise you're just going to be getting your hit points whittled away. So that's a bit of a blessing. This is also quite a low profile machine. I mean, you know, terrible gun depression, but it means he can reposition here relatively easily and not have, you know, half his turret sticking out behind these little hillocks. The Rhinotaur's not faring so well though, so he's going to have to, do something. But this is a bit of a tricky situation, because you need everybody to move more or less at once so that they can support each other. Because if the 110 and the 44-100 push in and Trigon was sat here doing nothing, then these guys here would make life a bit miserable for them. But as it is, well, everybody is more or less advancing at the same time, and so it looks like they're going to win, and it looks like they're doing all right across the map generally so far. He is, however, maybe wasting some heat shells, especially against the Rev. I think he had it loaded for the Lurva specifically, but given how the Lurva is angling at the moment, completely unnecessary. And I suspect, based on the fact that he does hastily switch back later on, I suspect this is one of those occasions where, and there we go, back to the AP, because he's seen the telltale heat impact coming from that Rev. Yeah, I don't think he realised he was firing the heat there. I think it's just one of those times when somebody forgets to switch back in the heat of the moment, if you'll forgive the pun. Don't forgive the pun. It was terrible. It was completely bad, and I deserve every form of punishment that I get for it. Anyway, so the 110 and the T-44-100 have won their bit. The Black Prince and the Strizavagan are pushing across the middle. The other side of the bridge held, so they're basically able to just go on the offensive. They've broken the back of the enemy team at this point, and they've lost some tanks themselves, but it's the stage where they can just mop up and dismantle what's left. Now he gets a bit lucky there with bouncing that Lurva, and then even luckier with that fire. That saved him an extra shot. And I think he just, you know, sometimes you can do that. It's actually worth just rushing somebody to try and throw them off. And it's especially viable if you're in a relatively bouncy Soviet medium tank, as this thing is. So you know, he actually did the right thing there. He could have just sat and waited it and played peekaboo, but sometimes being aggressive and using your hit points is the right thing to do. And bear that in mind, because there's a little bit later on where he could have done the same thing again. He could have played a bit more aggressively and used his hit points, but then he ended up not doing it. So, you know, if there's any one mistake that Trigon makes in this match, it's that coming moment. But it's not even really a mistake necessarily, it's just he could have, you know, played it a bit more aggressively and didn't, but then he didn't have to. So make of it what you will. So trading a bit of fire with the WZ, the Torty, and did he take a shot at the Tiger as well? I don't think he got a chance. But there's also a T-54E1 there, and it might be the T-54E1 that he's most worried about, because when that thing gets a chance to unload, it's not got huge pen, it's not a particularly reliable gun in that regard, but it does fire, was it like 400 per shell, and you can unload 4 of them, so it packs an almighty wallop, and you can get those shells out very, very quickly. But for now, I mean, he just, Trigon seems singularly unwilling to drive in front of this Torty gun, even with the T-54E1 almost dead. So this is the moment where I think he could have just basically driven around the Tortoise and helped take him out that much sooner. But like I say, maybe it was the T-54E1 he was more worried about, even though at that point he was distracted with the Black Prince. So I felt that was a little bit unnecessary, but you know, it was fine. It still worked out. The Stridswagen may have taken maybe an extra hit than he needed to, but as it wasn't going to affect the outcome of the game. So then they discover one of the remaining 2 enemy tanks has in fact been AFK the entire time, so that's just free damage and a free kill. And that just leaves the T-28 prot, who is perched up on that particular shelf, that rocky ledge area. And can you guess what this T-28 prototype is going to do? I bet you can. So, there's a reason people usually go up here. Quite often it's artillery, but very occasionally you'll see other tanks. And, oh yes, there we go. Scumbag T-28 prot has made a dive. And Trigon, makes a valiant effort. I think he was trying to get the gun round so he could get that shot on the way down. He was going for that that cool ending, and instead he face planted and completely wrecked his vehicle before he could get the shot off. It would have been even better if he'd tried to land on top, but it's actually really hard to do, so you're far more likely to end up falling flat on your face. And as it was, yes, the guy got to drown himself, so that was a bit unfortunate, but never mind. So it was top of the team, nearly 5.8k damage done, another 1300 assistance damage, ace tanker, top gun, and he actually bounced a fair bit as well, exactly 2500. So all in all, that maybe gives some idea of why high-tier Soviet medium tanks are so popular. So lastly, we come to a game of, can you guess which map this is? It's not very hard, is it? And to be fair, I started off with that because Menthel pleading for his teammates not to go to the beach was inevitably ignored by at least some of them, because this is World of Tanks, and some people just apparently find it very difficult to learn to spot the patterns of why sometimes things go wrong in this game. And one of the things that can go wrong is going to the beach and getting stuck there in your top tier tanks and just not contributing to the team. And in this case, it's 3 of the top tier heavies plus a top tier tank destroyer. Others having said top tier, actually this is an all tier 8 game, so that was slightly redundant, but never mind. But still, that's 4 tanks that are in not particularly useful positions right now. And to be fair, there's 3 enemy tanks. In fact, is it even 2 enemy tanks? It's hard to tell from the minimap. There's 1 IS-3 that might also be down there on the beach, but they're also in fairly terrible positions. But of his own team, well, there's just more of them there. So yeah, that might be a bit of a problem when it comes to map control. Menthol himself has come to the middle in the Liberté, which is the rather painted version of the AMX M449. And this thing, well, if you don't know, its gimmick is that it has pretty damn strong frontal armour, but the side armour is weak, and it's also got a very readily accessible weak spot on top of the turret, unlike the Defender. So it's still a very strong machine. It's got a very nice gun, but it is just a little bit less absurd than a machine like the Defender or the Chrysler K. Now there is artillery in this one, and artillery is actually going to turn out to be something of a vital factor, but more on that later. For now, he's just trading shots, relying on his armour a bit. Not so much the Oho behind him though, who might be more of a liability than an asset. From what we've seen so far. Personally, I'd be a little bit worried with this guy sitting behind me with their gun pointed, well, more or less at the back of my turret. But as it is, at least he's managed to land a hit on that Scorpion, so this wasn't completely wasted time. So that's 1 tank destroyer down, but there's bound to be more things back there. And that IS-6 is not so much a threat to his armour, however, some of the other things are. The 65T actually managed to land a damaging hit there, but of more concern perhaps is the fact that artillery is now focusing on him, and that was a fairly big chunk of hit points to have taken all at once. Well, having said that, actually no, it was, I'm just looking at the damage log, it was an IS-3. The Su-14 actually hit him for 500, which is a big hit for artillery these days. The 65T hit him with HE for about 100 damage. So, yeah, okay, maybe not so much the 65T being a threat, but that artillery, certainly. That was a very nasty hit to take from Arty these days, certainly. So clearly he doesn't want to stick around in that position anymore if artillery's just going to focus there. The IS-3 that turned up has decided to stay there, but maybe he also had an inkling that somebody was going to try and flank, because they don't have any tank destroyers sat back in the base like the enemy team do. And as it turns out, the instinct maybe was correct, because the IS-6 is there, and so he can try and be hulled down and do a bit of damage against this guy. Now, if the IS-6 knows about his weak spot, that gun is still dangerous, but the handling on the IS-6's gun is not especially great. So there's a pretty good chance he can just use the terrain and keep popping up and doing damage against this guy, and, well, getting shots into the side armour like that, that's more or less a dead cert. So just seeing what else is available without exposing himself too much. Long range shot on the enemy Oho, who that's unfortunately a bounce, probably because it was a long range shot. Meanwhile, the team on the beach not doing so well. The IS-3 has gotten overwhelmed by a defender, and it's all looking a little bit dicey at the moment. The enemy team basically did not bother with the 890 line at all, more or less. So his team's been able to make use of that to try and close in on him, them a bit, but it's not going that well just in terms of numbers, however, in terms of being able to outperform the enemy team, even though they've conceded so much ground, because they've managed to get themselves entrenched in various positions. And so this is where having the 4 tanks that went on the beach would have been useful if they'd been over on the eastern half of the map instead. Having those numbers there instead of on the beach could have made a lot of difference. Hell, even 3 of them, because, I mean, it can happen. You might end up needing 1 or 2 people defending those passes up from the beach anyway, because if it's completely uncontested, then I have seen situations where enemies just pop up from behind. So it's not a completely terrible idea to have at least 1 or 2 people in defensive positions. It's just those people could have been doing so much more useful things right now. And the same goes for the enemy players on the beach as well, really. Now, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, but it's 2 parts of the team fighting each other. How is that useless? It's just such a disconnected part of the map from the rest of the map. That's the main issue, essentially. Getting from there up to the cap circles even, it takes a fair while. So there are times when using the beach to flank around can be useful, but it tends to be more using the fact that there's 2 passages, both north and south, to immediately flank around somebody. Using the beach as a whole, it's generally considered to be a bit of a trap, and for good reason. So there was a bit of a bounce fest with that defender, who was even firing some APCR at him. I don't know if they were just not managing to hit the weak spot, or if they even didn't know about it, but that tells you how tough the frontal armour can be on this tank. So he's now up to over 2600. He's even bested what King Trigon managed in the previous game, and although it's not looking great for their team, it's certainly not lost yet. The tanks that had tried to push from the 890 line, they're mostly done for, apart from that FV, who is just about to be done for. There we go. But they did inflict some damage as they were on their way down. So Menthel might be able to pick up some kills on these now lower health enemies, but he's got to be careful about it. Now, enemy artillery is gone. That's a big bonus, but the team on the beach is about to collapse, so he's going to be, in short order, basically alone with artillery. And this is where what I've been saying about the beach becomes particularly relevant. So he tries to move round to pick up these tank destroyers, and unfortunately, well, he gets caught out in the open. And, well, is the armour going to hold? Let's keep our fingers crossed. That is the big gun on the Rheinmetall, by the way. And the answer is no. It's a low roll, but it does pen. And that was just AP. That wasn't even heat ammo. So that hurt. That's left him on very low health indeed. So he switches over to HE because, hey, it's a Rheinmetall. Except it might be the ISU that's the next thing he gets to fire at. So, yeah. And also, I think the ISU is using the... is that the long-barreled 152 mil? It's actually a bit hard to tell from this angle. But right now, if the enemy T-34 and Lerva hadn't been down on the beach, Menthil would be screwed. As it is, he's got these two tanks in front of him to contend with. He's still getting some use out of the armour. There we go. Bounces the Rheinmetall that time. He's also getting aid from his artillery, and the fact that he only has to deal with these two tanks is helping him out greatly, because if he had to deal with 4 tanks, well, at that point they could surely just have rushed him down. And as it was, the two tank destroyers, like the Rheinmetall was the more dangerous one there because it's got the rotatable turret, but potentially they could have ganged up on Menthil more effectively and just driven round him, and instead they let him dictate the pace of the engagement, and so therefore he was just able to use that wreck of the Oho, who proved more useful in death than in life, maybe, and keep his strongest armour towards them and therefore survive. And if either of them had fired HE at him, that might have been it. Those are big guns, but as it is, they were trying their AP and their APCR, and it was just bouncing. So that was a bit of a stroke of luck, but you know, as always in this game, it's not just about getting lucky, it's about taking advantage of that luck. Not talking about getting lucky, that was a complete snapshot. It was a PCR, so wherever it hit, you know, it had a good chance of penning if it wasn't into the gun mantlet or whatever. But given that the T-34 was mostly hull down, yeah, still, we can definitely count that as a lucky shot. Now, the Lerva is also very, very low health, but the Oho's coming up behind, so Menthil takes a chance, and again, his luck holds. And this kind of ties back to what I was saying before about sometimes you just have to rush down somebody and hope it works out. And in this case, it really was hoping that it worked out because he didn't exactly have a lot of health left. King Trigon in the previous game could easily have absorbed the hit from the Lerva that he rushed down, and certainly could have absorbed the hit driving around the Torty. But in this case, Menthil's on such low health that anything could kill him right now. But as it is, due to basically, you know, a combination of being able to play smart and also with a bit of luck, he's come down to this situation where it's 1 versus 1. They're both low health, they can both kill each other, but crucially, the artillery on his team is still alive and has been helping him out all the while. So either he could again take the chance, but you can tell he clearly doesn't want to when the artillery's still in play, and so he plays it a bit patiently, and artillery does manage to take out that low health Oho, and so with a bit of prudent waiting, they have managed to win the game. So that was an ace tanker, a steel wall, and another top gun. It was all top guns today. Even the terrible tier 4 tank managed a top gun. And this time, well, 2,500 damage is pretty respectable. There were other people on the team that did about as much, including the artillery, in fact. So it wasn't really the damage that was spectacular in this one. It was more how well his armor held up at various points. But that was really more down to his enemies derping out. You know, those 2 tank destroyers contributed an awful lot to that 6,000 damage blocked. And so, yeah, there was a heavy element of luck in this one, but he kept his head all the same. And that's absolutely crucial in World of Tanks. You've got to not panic, because if you panic, then generally speaking, that's it. You're done for. So that's it for this supporter spotlight. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.